The massive Zephyrian science ship, Enlightened Curiosity, moved slowly through the scattered wreckage floating in space. Commander Hannah stood at the main viewing window, her tall, crystalline body catching the light from distant stars. Her large eyes studied the broken pieces of metal and debris that stretched out before them like a graveyard of ships. "Commander," called Science Officer Kiwan from his control station, his 4 arms working quickly over the glowing buttons and screens. "I'm detecting something unusual in Sector 7. There's a ship that doesn't match any known designs in our database." Hannah turned away from the window and walked over to Kiwan's station. The Zephyrians had been exploring space for thousands of years. Their computers contained information about every spacefaring species they had ever encountered. Finding an unknown ship was extremely rare and exciting for scientists like them. "Show me," Hannah said, her voice calm but curious. The main screen flickered and displayed an image of a dark gray ship floating among the wreckage. It looked different from anything they had seen before, where most civilized ships were smooth and waned. Curved, built for exploration and peaceful travel, this vessel appeared sharp and dangerous. Its hull was covered in strange angles and pointed sections that looked like weapons. "What do you think it is?" asked Dr. Minji, the ship's lead biologist, as she joined them at the viewing screen. Her tentacles moved nervously as she studied the alien craft. "I'm not sure," Kiwan replied, his voice filled with concern. "The design is very primitive compared to our technology. Look at these readings. The ship appears to be made from basic metal alloys that we stopped using centuries ago, but something about it feels wrong." The unknown ship was much smaller than their science vessel, but it looked incredibly solid and heavily armored. Strange markings covered its hull in a language none of them recognized. Most disturbing of all were the many weapon ports and missile tubes that covered almost every surface of the craft. "It's built like a weapon," observed Engineer Jiho, who had quietly approached to study the readings. "Most ships have weapons for protection, but this thing, it's like someone took a giant gun and added just enough space for a crew to operate it." Hannah studied the tactical display, showing the ship's specifications. The vessel carried an enormous amount of firepower for its size. Where a typical exploration ship might have 2 or 3 defensive weapons, this craft appeared to have dozens of different weapon systems. Some were clearly designed for fighting other ships, while others seemed meant for attacking planets. "Commander, I'm reading no life signs aboard the vessel," reported Kiwan after running another scan. "But the hull appears to be intact. We could bring it into our cargo bay for closer examination." "What about radiation or biological hazards?" asked Dr. Minji, always cautious when dealing with unknown alien technology. "The scans show some residual energy signatures, but nothing dangerous to us. The ship appears to have been shut down for several days, possibly weeks." Hannah considered their options carefully. As scientists, they were trained to study and learn from everything they encountered. This unknown ship represented a fascinating mystery. The battle they had come to investigate had been between the Galactic Hegemony and some unknown force. The Hegemony was one of the most powerful military organizations in the galaxy, yet they had suffered their first major defeat here. "The Hegemony has never lost a battle before," Hannah said thoughtfully. "If this ship belongs to the force that defeated them, we need to understand how they did it." But Commander Jiho said nervously, "What if it's dangerous? What if there are booby traps or some kind of automated defense system?" "Our shields can protect us from most threats," Hannah replied. "And think about what we could learn. This might be our first contact with an entirely new species. The scientific value alone makes it worth the risk." Dr. Mingi moved closer to study the detailed scans. "The ship's design suggests the beings who built it think very differently from us. Every decision in its construction seems focused on causing maximum damage to enemies. Even the shape of the hull is designed to be intimidating." "There's something else," Kiwan added, pointing to additional readings on his screen. "The ship's computer systems are still partially active. If we can access their databanks, we might learn about their technology, their culture, maybe even their home world." The bridge fell silent as everyone considered the implications. Zephyrians were peaceful explorers who had spent centuries studying different cultures and sharing knowledge throughout the galaxy. But this ship represented something they had never encountered before, a vessel built purely for war by a species they knew nothing about. "Bring it aboard," Hannah finally decided. But take every precaution. Full quarantine protocols, maximum security, and I want armed guards posted around the cargo bay at all times." As the enlightened Curiosity's powerful tractor beam began pulling the mysterious warship into their cargo hold, none of the Zephyrian scientists could imagine what they were about to discover. They thought they were simply examining the technology of an unknown species. They had no idea they were about to encounter something that would terrify them more than anything they had ever studied before. The ship was human. The alien warship sat in the center of the enlightened Curiosity's largest cargo bay, surrounded by bright white lights and scanning equipment. Teams of Zephyrian scientists moved around it carefully, their various tools beeping and humming as they collected data. The ship looked even more threatening up close, its dark metal surface covered in scratches and burn marks from recent battles. Dr. Minji approached the ship's main entrance, which their cutting tools had finally managed to open.
Ow.
She wore a full protective suit even though their scans showed the air inside was safe. As the lead biologist on the expedition, she would be the first to enter and examine the living spaces of this unknown species. "I'm going inside now," she reported through her communication device. "The atmosphere is breathable for us, but it's much denser than what we're used to. The oxygen levels are actually toxic. No Zephyrian could survive breathing this air for more than a few minutes." She stepped through the doorway and immediately noticed how cramped everything was. The corridors were narrow and low, forcing her to bend down as she moved. The walls were made of thick metal, much thicker than necessary for normal space travel. It was as if the builders expected their ship to be constantly under attack. "Commander, these beings live in conditions that would kill most civilized species." Minji continued her report as she examined the crew quarters. "Look at these sleeping areas. They're tiny metal boxes with barely enough room for one person. And the gravity settings." She paused to check her instruments. "The artificial gravity is set to nearly twice our normal level. These creatures must be incredibly strong just to move around normally." The personal belongings she found in the crew areas were equally disturbing. Instead of art, books, or entertainment devices like most species carried, these beings kept collections of weapons, combat manuals, and images of previous battles. Their clothing was all designed for fighting, with built-in armor and equipment attachments. Meanwhile, Engineer Jiho was examining the ship's weapon systems with growing alarm. He had never seen anything like the arsenal carried by this small vessel. Where most ships had simple defensive energy weapons, this craft carried dozens of different killing devices. "Commander Hannah, you need to see this," Jiho called out, his voice shaking. "These weapons aren't just designed to destroy enemy ships. They're designed to cause maximum suffering to whoever they hit." He showed her a collection of projectile weapons that fired solid metal bullets instead of energy beams. But these weren't simple bullets. They were designed to break apart inside their targets, creating massive internal damage. Other weapons fired explosive shells that would tear huge holes in enemy vessels, likely killing many crew members in horrible ways. "And look at these chemical weapons," Jiho continued, pointing to sealed containers in the armory. "According to my analysis, these compounds are designed to cause fear and panic, not just death. They would make enemy crews suffer terribly before they died." Dr. Soyen, the ship's psychologist, had been studying the computer files they had managed to access. What she found was perhaps the most disturbing discovery of all. She called the senior officers together for an emergency meeting in the ship's conference room. "The crew records I've examined show something that challenges everything we know about intelligent life," she began, her usually calm voice filled with stress. "These beings, who call themselves humans, don't seem to fear death the way every other species does. In fact, they appear to welcome it under certain circumstances." She displayed several files on the main screen showing personal logs from the human crew members. The translations were rough, but the meaning was clear. The humans wrote about missing their families while also expressing excitement about upcoming battles. They formed close friendships with their teammates while casually accepting that those same friends might die violently at any moment. "They have something they call acceptable casualties," Soyen continued. "This means they plan for a certain number of their own people to die in every battle, and they consider this normal and necessary." Commander Hannah studied the files with growing horror. In Zephyrian culture, even one death was considered a terrible tragedy to be avoided at all costs. The idea of planning for multiple deaths seemed insane and barbaric. "There's more," Soyen said. "Their training manuals describe something called total war, the complete destruction of enemy forces and resources, and scorched earth tactics. Destroying everything useful in an area so enemies cannot use it, even if it means making entire planets uninhabitable." The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. These humans didn't just fight wars, they fought them with a level of brutality and determination that no civilized species could comprehend. They were willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve victory, including themselves. "What kind of evolution would create beings like this?" asked Dr. Minji quietly. "I don't know," replied Hannah, staring at the data on the screen. "But I'm beginning to understand how they defeated the hegemony. You can't fight an enemy that doesn't follow any rational rules of warfare." As the teams continued their analysis throughout the day, each new discovery made the humans seem more terrifying and incomprehensible. They had found something truly alien, not in body, but in mind. Dr. Soyen sat alone in her laboratory, surrounded by dozens of screens displaying human personnel files. She had been working for hours, trying to understand the minds of these strange beings called humans. Each file she opened revealed something more disturbing than the last. Her tentacles moved nervously as she scrolled through page after page of psychological evaluations and sides. Personal records. The crew of the human warship Retribution consisted of 237 individuals. What shocked Soyen most was their ages. Many were barely adults by galactic standards. In Zephyrian society, it took decades of training and mental preparation before anyone was allowed near dangerous situations. But these humans had volunteered for military service when they were still young and inexperienced. "Computer, translate this personal diary entry," she commanded. Pointing to a file belonging to someone named Minseo, age 19, the translation appeared on her screen. "Today marks 6 months since I joined the crew. I miss my family terribly, especially my little sister Hyene, but I'm excited about tomorrow's mission against the hegemony fleet. Finally a chance to prove myself in real combat. I hope I make my parents proud." Soyen stared at the words in disbelief. This young human was eager to fight in a battle where he might die horribly, and he saw this as a way to honor his family. In Zephyrian culture, parents would be devastated if their children chose such a dangerous path. But human families seemed to encourage it. She opened another file, this one belonging to a female named Jiwan, age 22. Her diary entries were even more disturbing. "Lost 3 good friends in yesterday's battle. Kyung-ho, Taeyun, and Sun-woo won't be coming home. But we destroyed 2 hegemony cruisers, so their sacrifice meant something. I'll carry their memory with me into the next fight." The casual way this human accepted the death of her friends horrified Soyen. Any Zephyrian would need years of psychological treatment after witnessing such trauma. But Jiwan seemed to consider it a normal part of her life, even something noble and meaningful. Dr. Soyen called Commander Hannah to request an emergency meeting. When the senior staff gathered in the conference room, she began her presentation. With shaking hands, "I've analyzed over 50 human personnel files," she began. "And what I've discovered challenges everything we know about intelligent behavior. These humans don't just accept death, they seem to embrace it as something honorable and necessary." She displayed several cultural documents they had found in the ship's database. The humans had thousands of years of stories, songs, and traditions, celebrating individuals who died fighting for their beliefs. They called it dying with honor and considered it one of the highest achievements possible. "Look at this," Soyen said, showing them a human military ceremony. "They have rituals where they remember dead soldiers and promise to follow their example. They don't mourn death in battle, they celebrate it." Engineer Jiho shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "But surely they must fear pain and suffering like any rational being?" "That's what makes this even more disturbing," Soyen replied. "They do fear these things, but they've trained themselves to overcome that fear. They call it courage, and they consider it essential for being a good person." She showed them training records from the human military academies. Young humans were deliberately put through painful and frightening experiences to prepare them for war. They were taught to ignore their natural survival instincts and sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like duty, honor, and country. They have something called brotherhood, Soyin continued. They form emotional bonds with their fellow soldiers that are stronger than family relationships. But instead of making them more protective of each other, it makes them more willing to die together. Dr. Minji spoke up from her seat at the table. We found evidence of this in their living quarters. They sleep in groups, eat together, and spend all their free time together. But their conversations are filled with casual discussion of violence and death. There's something else, Soyin said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. There. Entertainment media. Every form of human art and storytelling seems to focus on conflict, survival against impossible odds, and individuals fighting against overwhelming forces. She displayed examples of human movies, books, and games. All of them featured violence as a central theme, but not in a way that showed it as evil or tragic. Instead, they portrayed violence as exciting, heroic, and inspiring. Humans seemed to enjoy watching and reading about war, even in their free time. They have stories about single warriors defeating entire armies, Soyin explained. Tales of people who chose death rather than surrender. Legends of individuals who sacrificed everything to save others. These aren't cautionary tales warning against violence. They're inspiration for young humans to follow the same path. Commander Hannah studied the data with growing alarm. Their entire culture is designed to produce warriors. Worse than that, Soyin replied. Their culture produces individuals who see violent death as the ultimate expression of personal worth. They've weaponized their own mortality, turning their short lifespans into a tactical advantage. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. The humans weren't just fighters, they were a species that had evolved to find meaning and purpose in destruction and self-sacrifice. They didn't fight because they had to, but because they wanted to, because their entire society told them it was the most noble thing they could do. No wonder the hegemony couldn't defeat them, whispered Jiho. How do you fight an enemy that considers dying in battle to be a victory? Commander Hannah paced back and forth in the main conference room, her crystalline features reflecting the harsh lights above. The past 3 days of studying the human warship had shaken her understanding of warfare itself. She had called together her senior officers for an emergency meeting that would change everything they thought they knew about the recent battle. I need everyone to forget what we've learned about military strategy, Hannah began, her voice tense with worry. The humans didn't defeat the hegemony through better technology or superior numbers. They won through something far more dangerous. They made themselves completely unpredictable. Tactical Officer Minho activated the main display screen, showing battle recordings they had recovered from both human and hegemony sources. His hand shook slightly as he prepared his analysis. In his 20 years of military study, he had never encountered anything like what he was about to present. Every spacefaring civilization follows logical patterns in warfare, Minho explained to the gathered officers. We can predict enemy movements, calculate optimal strategies, and negotiate reasonable surrenders when battles are lost. But humans... He paused, struggling to find the right words. They operate outside all known military logic. The first video showed a human destroyer facing 3 larger hegemony cruisers. According to all tactical knowledge, the human ship should have either retreated or surrendered. Instead, it charged directly at the enemy fleet, ramming the largest cruiser and exploding both ships in a massive fireball. The human captain could have escaped, Minho continued, his voice filled with disbelief. Their ship was faster and could have jumped to hyperspace. They chose to destroy themselves and take an enemy ship with them. The hegemony commanders were so shocked by this suicidal attack that they made tactical errors, allowing other human ships to win the battle. Dr. Minji leaned forward in her chair, studying the recording. But that makes no strategic sense. Lost a valuable ship and crew for no reason. That's what we thought too, replied Minho. But look at this next example. The screen showed another battle where human forces were clearly losing. Their main fleet was surrounded and taking heavy damage. Then something happened that defied all military understanding. The human admiral ordered his crews to detonate their own reactors, rather than allow the hegemony to capture their ships. 23 human vessels self-destructed in less than 5 minutes, Minho reported. They destroyed themselves rather than give the enemy any chance to study their technology or interrogate their crews. The hegemony fleet was left with nothing but wreckage and radiation. Engineer Jiho examined the tactical data with growing horror. They have protocols for this? Deliberately destroying their own forces? It's called mutually assured destruction, answered Dr. Soyan, who had been studying human military documents. If they cannot win, they ensure their enemies cannot win either. They would rather see everything destroyed than accept defeat. Commander Hannah called up another set of recordings, these ones even more disturbing. They showed human commanders making decisions that seemed completely irrational from a military standpoint. Human fleets would abandon strong defensive positions to protect civilian transport ships. They would sacrifice entire squadrons to rescue single damaged vessels with no strategic value. Here's what really terrifies the hegemony, Hannah said, pointing to a specific battle recording. In this engagement, the humans had a clear tactical advantage. They could have destroyed the entire hegemony force with minimal losses. Instead, their admiral chose to take massive casualties to avoid hitting a hegemony hospital ship that was in the battle zone. They protected their enemies wounded, asked Minji in amazement. Yes, and it cost them dearly. But somehow, this illogical decision made them more dangerous, not less. The hegemony couldn't predict what they would do because humans follow moral rules that override tactical considerations. Minho brought up a detailed analysis of human battle tactics. They'll fight to the death to rescue a single crew member. They'll abandon superior positions to protect non-combatants. They'll refuse to use certain weapons because they consider them dishonorable, even when those weapons would guarantee victory. But how does following these strange rules make them stronger? Asked Jiho. Because the hegemony built their entire military strategy around fighting rational opponents, Hannah explained. They expect enemies to surrender when defeat is certain, to prioritize survival over abstract principles, to make decisions based on logical calculations. But humans make decisions based on emotional concepts like honor, duty, and sacrifice. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. The galactic hegemony had conquered half the known galaxy through superior tactics and overwhelming force. They were experts at breaking enemy morale and forcing surrenders through psychological warfare, but none of their methods worked on humans. The hegemony's greatest strength became their weakness, Soyan added. They couldn't understand an enemy that viewed death as acceptable. It fought for ideas instead of territory that would rather lose everything than compromise their beliefs. Minho displayed the final piece of evidence, a recording of the last major battle in the war. The human fleet was outnumbered 10-1, with no hope of victory. But instead of surrendering, they launched what they called a final charge, a desperate attack that inflicted so much damage on the hegemony forces that the alien empire decided the war was too costly to continue. They didn't win through superior firepower, Hannah concluded. They won because they convinced the hegemony that fighting humans was impossible. You cannot defeat an enemy that considers extinction preferable to surrender. The implications were clear and terrifying. Humanity had not just won a war, they had proven that civilized warfare itself was useless against them. Commander Hannah stood alone in her private quarters, staring out at the stars, while holding the final report that would forever change how the galaxy viewed intelligent life. 3 weeks had passed since they first brought the human warship aboard, and every day of analysis had revealed something more terrifying about these creatures called humans, the enlightened. Curiosity was now heading back to the Zephyrian home world, carrying knowledge that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Hannah had barely slept in days, her mind struggling to process what they had discovered. She activated her personal recording device to make one final log entry. Before submitting her report, personal log, Commander Hannah, final entry regarding the human vessel analysis. She began, her voice heavy with exhaustion and fear. After extensive study, I must conclude that humanity represents something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that has evolved to find purpose and meaning in destruction. Dr. Minji knocked softly on the door before entering. Her usual confident demeanor had been replaced by obvious stress and worry. The discoveries of the past weeks had affected everyone on the crew, but the scientists had taken it the hardest. "Commander, I've finished my biological assessment," Minji said, placing a datapad on Hannah's desk. "The humans aren't just unusual. They're an evolutionary impossibility. Every other intelligent species we know developed intelligence to avoid conflict and preserve life, but humans developed intelligence to make conflict more efficient and deadly." Hannah picked up the datapad and scrolled through Mingi's findings. The human body was optimized for violence in ways that seemed almost deliberate. Their hands were perfect for gripping weapons. Their eyes were designed for tracking moving targets. Their brains released chemicals that actually made them enjoy dangerous situations. "They have something called adrenaline," Minji continued. "When humans face danger or violence, their bodies flood with chemicals that make them stronger, faster, and more aggressive. Most species have fear responses that make them avoid danger, but humans have biological systems that make them seek it out." Dr. Soyan appeared in the doorway, carrying her own reports. Her psychological analysis had been the most disturbing of all their discoveries. She looked as if she hadn't slept in days, her eyes wide with the horror of what she had learned. "Commander, I need to add something to the final report," Soyan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The humans aren't just warriors by choice. Their entire society is a machine designed to produce perfect soldiers. From the moment they're born, every aspect of their culture shapes them for war." She explained how human children played games that simulated combat, how their schools taught them about historical battles as inspiring examples, and how their entertainment industry celebrated violence and conflict. Even their sports were modified, forms of ancient warfare, teaching teamwork, strategy, and the will to win at any cost. "They don't have a military class like other species," Soyan continued. "Every human is a potential soldier. Their farmers, teachers, and scientists can all be transformed into deadly fighters when their society calls for it. They call this total war mobilization." Engineer Jiho had been listening from the corridor and now stepped into the room. His analysis of human technology had revealed the final piece of the puzzle. Human weapons weren't just tools for fighting, they were works of art dedicated to the perfection of destruction. "Their technology isn't primitive," Jiho said, contradicting their initial assessment. "It's optimized for their psychological makeup. They don't build things to last or to be beautiful. They build them to be effective in battle. Their entire technological development has been focused on creating better ways to kill their enemies." Hannah looked at her 3 senior officers, all brilliant scientists who had spent their careers studying different forms of life throughout the galaxy. None of them had ever encountered anything that had shaken them so deeply. "What do we tell the Council?" Hannah asked. "How do we explain that we've discovered a species that treats war as their highest cultural achievement?" "We tell them the truth," Mingi replied firmly. "We tell them that humanity cannot be defeated through conventional means, because they don't fight conventional wars. They fight with their entire being, body, mind, and soul." Soyan added her own grim assessment. "We must recommend immediate diplomatic contact with human leadership. Under no circumstances should any galactic power consider humanity a threat to be eliminated. A species that prefers extinction to surrender cannot be conquered." "The hegemony learned this the hard way," Jiho observed. "They thought they could break human morale like they had broken every other species. Instead, they discovered that humans have no breaking point. They just fight harder when cornered." Hannah made her decision. She would submit a report recommending that the Galactic Council classify humanity as a protected species, not because they needed protection, but because the galaxy needed protection from them. The report would recommend immediate diplomatic contact and, above all, that no one should ever give humans access to advanced galactic technology. If humans could fight the hegemony to a standstill with primitive weapons, Hannah said quietly, imagine what they could do with energy shields, plasma cannons, and faster-than-light communication. As the enlightened Curiosity jumped to hyperspace, carrying its cargo of terrifying knowledge, one thought echoed through the minds of everyone aboard. Humanity had been noticed by the galaxy, and there was no going back. The age of peaceful exploration was ending, and the age of humanity was about to begin.